This was something I wanted to ask you. For those women who maybe have a problem with like a female not being a bishop, because you have an elders quorum president, you have a relief society president, and then you have the bishop, and the bishopric presides over the ward. I wanted to ask, is that not modeled after early Christianity? But when I
Yeah.
think of Jesus Christ and his 12 apostles, they were all men. Are we not modeling it after that? Like, am I missing something?
That's a great question. That's a very insightful question because the church does model early Christianity and sacrament meeting does model the early house church, where there was a bishop or overseer, episcopos, and then servants. The episcopos, the overseer, the bishop was the owner of the house church. And there were women who were owners of house churches like Lydia and others. And then their servants, diakonos, were the deacons. They served the sacred meal. And then the presbyters were the preachers, the priests, who would read the sacred reading or the lesson or the letter from Paul or whoever. So it is really modeled after early Christianity, although in early Christianity, sometimes the bishops were women and sometimes the deacons were women. What I love about LDS restoration is this inclusion, the way it was originally set up, that they were parallel. And what the women would do, they actually had, the Relief Society had its own table with its tablecloth, and the young women who were deacons would bring in the water and bring in the things, the setting for the table in the Relief Society meetings, which is really interesting. It's a really interesting parallel. But I think the precedent is there for sacrament meeting to be both like it was in early Christianity, but also as it was intended to be, I think originally, that it was inclusive. The lay ministry of sacrament meeting was inclusive. Men and women both could preach. Men and women both could pray. Uh, Men and women both could vote, in the meetings to approve changes and things. As for sitting on the stand, it's kind of a both and situation. There are two dimensions here. There's one dimension of just thinking of the house church with a bishop, the servants, and the preachers, which is what we have exactly in sacrament meeting. We have the bishop and the deacons serving the sacred meal, and then we have the preacher, whoever's preaching. And in terms of the apostles, this is a really important point. Jesus did not call 12 male apostles. He called 12 male elders of Israel who represented the 12 tribes of Israel, because that's who sat on the council of synagogue, was a council of 12 elders representing the 12 tribes of Israel. That's what Jesus called. When he came to calling apostles, he called both women and men as apostles. And this was restored in Kirtland, and the early saints understood this. And the women in Kirtland saw themselves as female apostles in the restored church. And they used the term apostle. So it's interesting, but it's kind of a both and situation where Jesus was honoring his Hebrew tradition of 12 male elders in the council over a synagogue. And in his traveling synagogue with his disciples, he was doing both. He was doing two different dimensions or levels. He was honoring his Hebrew tradition of 12 elders, but he was also calling male and female disciples, which was a Greek model of the teacher, the master, and his disciples. And so Jesus is doing both. He's dealing with people who are Hebrews and also people who were not necessarily Hebrews. So he's doing both. He's transcending his tradition with this inclusive disciples who would travel with him, both men and women, but also honoring that council of 12 elders. So in the LDS restoration, you see the same thing. You see Joseph calling apostles who were elders, and it says that apostles are elders in the D&C. They were elders. But then women were also brought into that lay ministry too.
Were women actually called as apostles or just disciples in the early church?
That's a great question. In LDS Origins, he called Joseph Smith called men as apostles, but they were elders. Their office was understood in the New Testament aspect of elders who were apostles, witnesses. So the women saw themselves as disciples, restoring the female discipleship and also the female apostleship from early Christianity. They saw themselves that way, at least according to what Edward Tollage and Eliza R. Snow said in the book Women of Mormondom. The first chapter says that the women in Kirtland considered themselves restoring that ancient early discipleship, and they saw themselves as apostles of Christ, restoring the original Christian church. But they were not formally called as apostles to represent the church in a formal ecclesiastical or legal way to the outside world. But within the church, the private society of the church, and this is how it was in early Christianity too, women had equality inside the private space of the early Christian church, but not outside in Roman culture. And it was like that with the early LDS Church. Outside, it was the men who had the authority, the official authority to represent the church. Inside the church, women were being given the right to vote. In 1830 was Section 26 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and women were co-founders of this restoration and working on the temple together and working on the church together. So in the Women of Mormondom, it says that they saw themselves as disciples and apostles of this new restoration. The women saw themselves as that. And so that was within the church itself, the sacred private sphere of the church, but not outside in its presentation to the world.
Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, and share. The Be Faithful podcast is not endorsed or sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is my personal attempt to share the light of Jesus Christ and to testify that He lives. So please stay tuned for more inspiring conversations. And until next time, keep the faith.